the first collected edition of the works of Geffrey Chaucer, printed in London in 1532. I'm Adam Douglas, Senior Specialist in Printed Books at Peter Harrington, and I'd like to show you this remarkable copy. To start with the outside for once, we can see this leather panels on the side of the binding are from the original binding. They've actually been lifted off and then relaid on the boards and the volume rebacked to preserve it. But if we look at the tooling there, the panels and the tooling, that is a contemporary binding, the first binding of the book that has been preserved. There's a note inside the book that says that this work was done in 1946, but that is a contemporary binding, which is a rare survival itself. But the real excitement is inside the book. This is the first attempt to collect the entire works of Chaucer into one volume. There we see the title page, and it becomes the ancestor of a sequence of black letter editions that continue right through until the 17th century. This edition by William Thynne forms the basis of that. And collecting his works together was a work really of national pride. Here is the preface dedicating it to the King, Henry VIII, by Sir Henry Tuke, his secretary. And this preface claims the importance of Chaucer as the father of the English language, which I think, even allowing for the changes in the English language, that's still recognised to be true. Here we see the list of titles that are included in this edition. Now, William Thynne was, in one respect, a little over-enthusiastic. He's included works by other authors, Henryson, Richard Rose, various others, in here, which are not by Chaucer, and later editors pruned them out. But of course, he gives it an accidental value as a compendium of Middle English literature. And the most important work, of course, is the Canterbury Tales, which we see the separate title page for here. And at the top, there's a early ownership inscription of Roger or Robert Tyrrell. And the book stayed in the Tyrrell family for several centuries and was sold eventually in an auction in the 1890s. Captain Walter Tyrell, his books, and it was bought by Lord Kenyon, this copy. So had stayed in one family for a very long time. Interestingly, there is another ownership inscription, which is also very early and possibly precedes Tyrrell's. It's in the Romaunt of the Rose, which is a translation of the French work, sometimes attributed to Chaucer. People have been arguing whether it's Chaucer ever since this edition was published. And here we see the inscription and the name of John Rappe, or perhaps Roper would be a later form of that surname. And interestingly, that inscription is, although it's an English owner, he's written his name twice, John Rappe there as well. That is written in French, and obviously French had been the language of the English court for some years, but was dying out by this point and had already died out in the court. But here it survives. So that's a very early ownership inscription in this book. Going back to the Canterbury Tales, the Canterbury Tales themselves had been previously printed as a separate work by William Caxton. He'd first printed it without illustrations and then included woodcuts. This edition does include some of Caxton's woodcuts, which are shown here. There are a couple of woodcuts, particularly the one at the Knight's Tale, which actually derived from Richard Pinson's edition, because he also had printed the Canterbury Tales. And the woodcut of the Knight and the Squire remained constants in all the black letter editions of Chaucer after this date. This is by far the most complete copy of this edition that has come into commerce in the last 40 years. The only other copy is the copy that was owned by William Morris and probably formed some inspiration for his Kelmscott Chaucer. That copy lacked 6 leaves. This copy does have, the first 3 leaves are in facsimile. This title page here, this title leaf, is facsimile, as you can probably even see on the film. It's quite bright paper. But then these two succeeding leaves are also very good quality text facsimile. But other than that, it is complete. There are one or two minor blemishes, as you'd expect in a folio of this size, but really it's in remarkably good condition. The importance of it really is placing Chaucer right at the head of European literature at a time when English wasn't necessarily as widespread and as easily read. There are very few English European poets published before Chaucer with this amount of respect. Dante is an obvious example, and François Villon, I think, is collected shortly after this. So we're talking the very earliest placing Chaucer at the head of European literature at a very early date in this fine Tudor volume. There's a full description of the book and of all our other early printed books on the Peter Harrington website.